When Denzel Washington surprises Jimmy Kimmel on air, he spots a necklace no one ever noticed. What he says next brings Jimmy to ears and the studio to its feet. The lights came up, the band played its familiar riff, and just like that, another night of Jimmy Kimmel Live was underway. Jimmy stepped out from behind the curtain, greeted by thunderous applause and a full house. He adjusted his suit jacket, flashed that signature smirk, and launched into his opening monologue like he'd done 1,000 times before. He cracked a few jabs about Congress, tossed in a joke about the latest Hollywood scandal, and paused just long enough to let the laughter land. It was sharp, polished, and perfectly timed, the kind of delivery that comes from years behind the desk. The energy in the studio was electric. Cameras panned across the crowd, capturing the wide smiles, the excited clapping, the occasional sign hoisted in the air by someone hoping for a few seconds of screen time. On the surface, it was business as usual, but something was different. You wouldn't notice it right away. Most didn't. Not through the television screen, not amid the fast-moving jokes or quick cuts to the audience. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you'd spot it. Just beneath Jimmy's shirt collar, glinting for the briefest moment under the stage lights, was a small silver chain. And at the end of that chain, mostly hidden beneath the fabric, was a cross. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to be seen, but it was there, subtle, personal, and completely out of step with the curated image of a late-night host known more for his sarcasm than his spirituality. He didn't mention it, didn't touch it, didn't draw attention to it. But it sat there, unmoving, as he delivered line after line of finely tuned comedy. The audience had no idea what was coming, no idea that tonight, behind the laughter and lights, something real was about to happen, and that the man behind the desk, the one who had spent years keeping things light, was about to be seen in a way no one expected. It was just another show, until it wasn't. The monologue wrapped. The band kicked in with a playful outro. Jimmy shuffled his note cards, leaned back in his chair, and threw to commercial like he always did. Then came the tease. "Stick around," he said with a grin, "because we've got something special coming up next." Audience murmurs followed. Viewers at home waited, curious. The show returned from break, music fading into the background. Jimmy sat at the desk, hands folded, face just a bit more serious than usual. "You know," he said, tapping a pen against the desk, "sometimes you get a moment you weren't expecting, and when that happens, you make room for it." He paused, then looked toward the side stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, Denzel Washington." The room erupted, not clapped, not cheered, erupted. A tidal wave of excitement rolled through the audience as Denzel stepped into the spotlight, effortlessly cool, dressed in a dark blazer and jeans, calm in the way only someone who's never needed to prove anything can be. Jimmy stood, greeted him with a handshake that lingered into a half embrace. You could tell this wasn't a booked segment. This was different. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight," Denzel said, smiling toward the crowd. "But I heard something, and I figured I should show up." Jimmy laughed, played it off. "He just shows up, people. I don't even get a text first." The audience was still buzzing, unsure of what this was, a surprise drop-in, a last-minute plug, or something else entirely. Denzel sat down. The band settled. And for the first time that night, Jimmy didn't look like a host prepping for the next punchline. He looked honored, a little caught off guard maybe, but not rattled, just quiet. Something about Denzel's presence had shifted the room. It didn't feel like a bit. It felt like a moment. And while the laughter hadn't disappeared, it had taken a step back, like it knew it needed to make space for something deeper. Jimmy leaned in. "So what made you come by tonight?" Denzel smiled, slow and sure. And what he said next would begin a conversation that no one in that room would ever forget. The applause hadn't even died down when Denzel stepped onto the stage. Calm, collected, confident in that quiet, unmistakable way. He didn't wave, didn't play it up. He just smiled, a small one, and walked with the kind of presence that made the whole room lean in without realizing it. Jimmy stood from behind the desk again, arms outstretched. "Ladies and gentlemen," he joked, "the most interesting man in the world." The crowd laughed. Denzel chuckled, shook Jimmy's hand again, and slid into the chair like he'd been there 100 times before. But this wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't scheduled. This was one of those rare television moments that wasn't manufactured. It just happened. Jimmy leaned over his desk, tapping his cards. "You know," he said, "you've got the kind of energy that makes me feel like I'm about to get both inspired and scolded at the same time." More laughter. Denzel nodded slowly. "That's fair," he said. "I call it father energy." The room cracked up. The tension softened. For a moment, everything fell back into place. The rhythm of the show returning like muscle memory. They swapped a few stories. Jimmy asked about an old director they'd both known. Denzel tossed out a dry one-liner about actors who forget their lines and blame the script. The audience ate it up. But there was something underneath it all. Not heavy, not yet, just something. A slow pull in the air, a shift that hadn't fully arrived but was beginning to move in from the edges. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, chuckling. "You always do this, man. You come in here, drop 3 sentences, and suddenly I feel like I need to go home and rethink my life." Denzel smiled. "That's the plan." And that was the moment everything started to change. Because the jokes had landed, the laughter had echoed. But now, Denzel's smile faded just slightly. Not completely, just enough. And the calm in his voice began to deepen. He wasn't just here to talk. He was here to say something that mattered. Jimmy shuffled his note cards again out of habit more than necessity. The usual back-and-forth banter had hit its stride. Everything felt smooth. But then Denzel leaned forward, just a little. His hands folded, his tone dipped, softer but stronger. The shift was subtle, but immediate. The kind of shift you feel before you realize you're feeling it. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking a lot lately about purpose, about what kind of legacy we leave behind when the lights go down and the audience goes home." The room quieted, the way it does when the air changes, when you can feel something meaningful stepping into the conversation. Jimmy tilted his head. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in Denzel's films, when the character was about to say something that lived with you long after the credits rolled. "I've done the movies," Denzel continued, "the awards, the speeches, but at some point, it's not about what you did on screen, it's about what kind of light you carried off of it." Jimmy nodded. "That's deep." Denzel smiled, but his eyes didn't move. "They say what's in your heart eventually shows up in your life, in how you treat people, in how you lead, in what you stand for when nobody's watching." Jimmy stayed quiet, listening. "And I saw something," Denzel said. He paused just long enough for the room to lean in with him. Then his gaze dropped, not to Jimmy's face, but just beneath the collar of his shirt, to the small silver cross around his neck. "I saw that," Denzel said, nodding toward it. "That cross. You've been wearing it the whole time." Jimmy instinctively reached for it, fingers brushing against the chain, like part of him had forgotten it was visible. Denzel leaned back. "That's not for show, that's something real, something quiet, and I respect that." The audience was silent now, because this wasn't late-night TV anymore. This was something different, something deeper. And for the first time all evening, Jimmy Kimmel didn't know what to say. "You know," Denzel said, his voice low but clear, "before we even started, I saw that cross around your neck." And just like that, the room changed. The laughter stopped. The lightness faded. The audience quieted, not out of awkwardness, but respect, like they sensed something sacred had been touched and instinctively knew not to disturb it. Jimmy blinked. The smile on his face didn't fall, but it softened, like a mask being lowered slowly and without resistance. His hand moved, not dramatically, not for show, just a subtle reach toward his chest. His fingers found the small silver cross, the one that sat just beneath the fabric, mostly hidden from view. He didn't say anything, didn't need to, because for that moment, words would have only gotten in the way. Denzel didn't press. He just nodded once, as if to say, "I see you," without needing to explain anything else. "You've had that on for years," Denzel said gently, "and you never bring it up, never point to it, never build a segment around it." Jimmy let out a breath, barely audible. "I noticed it once, a long time ago," Denzel continued, "didn't say anything then. But I remembered, because something about it felt intentional, private." The cameras didn't cut, the producers didn't interrupt, the audience didn't even shift in their seats. It was as if the whole room had collectively agreed to just be still. "You don't wear it for applause," Denzel said. "You wear it for you." And in a world of sound bites, filters, and digital noise, that meant something. Jimmy finally looked up. His eyes met Denzel's. There was no bit to lean on, no sarcasm to buffer the weight of the moment, just a man holding back tears, sitting beneath the spotlight, not as a performer, but as himself. "That cross," Denzel said, tapping his own chest softly, "that tells me everything I need to know." Jimmy nodded once. And in that silence, something passed between them, something unspoken, but deeply understood, a kind of recognition of who they really were beneath it all. Denzel leaned back in his chair, hands still folded, eyes still on Jimmy. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't trying to make a point for the cameras. He was just speaking, slowly, thoughtfully, like he was talking to a friend in a room full of strangers. "You know," he said, "people talk a lot about faith these days. They post about it, they brand it, turn it into a slogan, and sometimes that's fine. Sometimes people need to see it loud." He paused. "But not always." He turned back to Jimmy. "Sometimes," he said, "the strongest kind of faith is the kind you don't talk about, the kind you just live." Jimmy didn't move. He just sat there, shoulders slightly drawn, as if Denzel's words were peeling something back he wasn't sure he was ready to show. "But I've seen it," Denzel said. "Over the years, you show up. You're kind to the people no one sees. You treat the janitor the same way you treat the A-list actor. You take care of your staff. You do things quietly, without asking for credit." He gestured toward the necklace again. "That cross, it's not decoration, it's direction. Even if you don't talk about it, it shows up in how you live, in the way you carry people through a joke, in the way you bring people together, even when things are falling apart." Jimmy swallowed hard. His fingers were still resting gently on the chain. "You've been preaching this whole time," Denzel added, "just not with words." The audience was still silent. Some of them had tears in their eyes and didn't even know why. Maybe because they were watching someone be seen, fully, in a way most people never are. "And I respect that," Denzel finished. "I respect quiet faith, because it's not about proving anything, it's about being something." Jimmy finally smiled again, but this one was different. It wasn't for the cameras, it was for him. And in that moment, the cross around his neck wasn't just a necklace. It was a story, and for the first time, it had been heard. Jimmy sat still, one hand resting over the cross at his chest. The studio, usually buzzing with applause and jokes, had become something else entirely, something quieter, more sacred. Denzel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. "You know, people think they gotta shout to be heard," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Like if you're not preaching from a stage or posting scriptures on your feed, then your faith must not be real." He shook his head. "But that's not how grace works." The words landed like a pin drop in a glass room. Every breath in the audience seemed held. Even the crew behind the cameras had stopped moving. You don't need a pulpit to reflect grace, Denzel continued. You've been doing it from behind that desk for years. Jimmy blinked slowly, emotion flickering across his face. He didn't try to stop it. He didn't hide it behind a joke. He just listened. You take this seat every night and you turn it into something more than entertainment, Denzel said. You make people laugh, yeah. But more than that, you give them comfort. A place to go when the world feels too heavy. He gestured gently toward the audience. These people come home from work, from heartbreak, from loss, and they find you, not preaching, not pointing fingers, just being there, consistent, kind, true. Jimmy's throat tightened. The cross caught the light as he shifted slightly, the chain barely moving. I've seen a lot of loud people in my life, Denzel added. Loud about God, loud about values. But when it gets hard, when the storm comes, they vanish. He paused. You didn't vanish? The line settled like a weight in the air. The audience stayed completely still. Jimmy wasn't just being praised. He was being seen for something he'd never once pointed out himself. You showed up, Denzel said softly. Not to preach, but to shine. Jimmy exhaled through his nose, a mix of gratitude and disbelief in his eyes. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was a testimony. And Jimmy, for the first time, was the one receiving it. Denzel leaned back in his chair, gaze softening. I wasn't always steady, he began. There was a time in my life when I almost let it all go. Faith, purpose. That little voice that used to guide me, I couldn't hear it anymore. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get dramatic, but you could feel it, that this wasn't a rehearsed story. This was real. It was the early days, Denzel said, before the fame, before the red carpets. I'd just taken a role I knew wasn't right for me, not because of the money or the script, but because it didn't align with who I was trying to become. He paused, his hands now loosely folded together. And I remember sitting in this little trailer, alone, tired, broke, wondering if I had it all wrong, wondering if I'd already messed up too much to be worth anything. The crowd was silent, not a cough, not a shuffle, just the weight of his words filling the space. And then, he continued, this older woman who worked on set, wardrobe I think, she sat down next to me during lunch one day, didn't ask what was wrong, didn't pry. She just looked at me and said, sometimes the enemy attacks loudest when you're closest to where you're supposed to be. Denzel blinked slowly. That line changed everything for me. Jimmy was frozen, hanging on every word. I thought about walking away, Denzel said, but instead, I walked forward, slower but with more intention. I made a promise that day. I'd carry my faith quietly, but boldly, not on stage, not in interviews, just in how I live. He turned to Jimmy again. And that's why I noticed you. Denzel pointed to the cross, then to Jimmy's heart. Because that's what you've been doing. You don't push it, you don't wave it around. But it's there, in how you handle people, in how you stay grounded, in the way you walk forward. Jimmy nodded, tears welling again, unable to speak. You don't have to shout to show strength, Denzel said. Sometimes the strongest faith is the quietest kind. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He tried again, clearing his throat, blinking hard, the way someone does when they're trying to keep it together under lights that weren't meant to illuminate moments like this. Not like this. His voice caught in his chest, stuck somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. The kind of emotion that doesn't come out clean, the kind that swells in your throat and settles behind your eyes before you even realize it's there. He shifted in his seat. And when he did, the cross around his neck, the one so carefully tucked under layers all these years, slipped just slightly out from under his collar. Now it was visible, not bold, not shining on purpose, but present. A quiet symbol that had gone unnoticed for so long, suddenly center stage in front of millions. Denzel didn't say anything. He just watched, kind, patient, steady, giving Jimmy the space to feel without needing to fill the silence. The audience didn't move either. The stillness was almost holy. A crowd that came for late-night laughs was now bearing witness to something rare. A moment of truth, unedited and unrehearsed. Jimmy swallowed hard, his lips pressing together. He blinked again, eyes glassy now. His hand instinctively moved to the necklace, fingers curling around the cross like it was something to hold on to, something grounding, something older and deeper than the jokes and the lights and the stage. But the words still wouldn't come. Because how do you respond when someone sees a part of you you never expected to show? How do you speak when the part of you that usually talks, the entertainer, the interviewer, the host, has stepped back, leaving only the man? So he nodded, small, honest. Not to signal that he was okay, not to move on, but to say thank you, without needing to say anything at all. Denzel nodded back. No spotlight, no applause, just understanding. The kind that doesn't need words. It started slow, not dramatic, not TV-worthy in the way networks love to package emotion. Just a single tear, sliding down Jimmy's cheek, catching the edge of his jaw, then falling quietly into the fabric of his shirt. He didn't wipe it away, didn't hide it, didn't laugh it off. He just let it happen. Because this wasn't the kind of moment you cover up. This wasn't performance. It was release. He exhaled. Not loud, not heavy, just enough to steady himself. Then finally, after what felt like a full minute of silence, he found the words, "I didn't think you noticed." It came out like a whisper, fragile, honest, completely unscripted. Denzel smiled. Not a grin, not for effect, but a soft, knowing smile. Like he understood the full weight of what those 6 words meant. I didn't think you noticed. The necklace, the faith, the quiet way Jimmy had carried it for years without ever once making it part of the show. The prayer whispered before air, the thoughtful decisions made behind closed doors, the kindness no one clapped for. And yet, Denzel had noticed. The audience, still silent, felt that line like a wave. Because how many of us walk through life wondering if anyone sees us? Not the version we show, but the real us, the parts we protect, the convictions we carry in silence. In that moment, Jimmy was every one of us, vulnerable, seen, and finally accepted, not for the entertainer he played each night, but for the quiet man beneath it. Denzel reached out, laid a gentle hand on the desk, not quite touching Jimmy's, but close. "I see you," he said softly, and that was enough. Because sometimes one tear says more than a speech, and sometimes the most powerful thing a person can hear is that who they are in private matters. It started with a single clap from somewhere near the front row, light, tentative. Then another, then another. And suddenly, like something inside the room had exhaled all at once, the audience was on its feet. It wasn't the usual late-night standing ovation, the kind producers nudge into existence with applause signs and stage cues. This one was different. There was no music swell, no punchline, no wrap-up energy, just people. Clapping, not because they were supposed to, but because they just witnessed something real. Jimmy sat there, still wiping his face with the back of his hand, his smile small but honest. The necklace still visible now, not tucked away, not hidden, just there, natural, quietly proud. Denzel didn't stand. He didn't take a bow. He just sat beside Jimmy, nodding slowly, soaking in the moment like a man who understood its weight. Even the band, usually quick to jump in with a beat or riff, held back. The drummer let his sticks rest on the snare. The keyboardist sat with his hands in his lap. It was a rare moment on late-night TV, a full studio frozen not in silence, but in reverence. It wasn't about the celebrity, it wasn't about the host. It was about the humanity, about 2 men, one who'd shown up to say something that mattered, and another who'd finally let himself be seen. And the audience knew it, they felt it. They weren't applauding a performance, They were honoring a moment, one that had nothing to do with ratings and everything to do with truth. When the ovation finally settled, Jimmy looked out across the crowd, eyes still glassy. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Because for the first time all night, the laughter didn't matter. The message did. Denzel leaned in, his voice calm, his tone lower now. The kind of voice you hear in a quiet room just before someone says something you'll remember forever. He looked at Jimmy, not as a guest talking to a host, but as one man speaking to another. "You know what the world's loud with right now?" he asked. Jimmy didn't answer. He just listened. "Hate," Denzel said. "Division. Noise." The audience was quiet again, not frozen, just listening, fully. "The world is loud with hate," Denzel repeated. People shouting at each other, judging what they don't understand, mocking what they don't agree with, and in all that noise, it's easy to stay quiet, easy to keep your light under the table. Jimmy looked down, the cross still resting outside his shirt. Denzel nodded toward it. "But let people see you're good." His voice didn't rise. He didn't make it dramatic. He just let the words settle, like truth always does, quietly, confidently, without apology. "Let them see that cross, Jimmy." Not because you want them to clap, not because it makes a headline, but because it means something. Jimmy's lip quivered, just slightly. He nodded. "You've carried that part of you close," Denzel said, "and you've never once made it about you. That's grace, that's faith, that's leadership." The audience was silent, no shifting, no side chatter, just stillness, like they knew they were sitting inside something sacred. "So keep showing up," Denzel said. "Keep doing good, keep living it, because this world doesn't need more noise." He placed a hand gently over his chest, where his own heart beat steady beneath his shirt. "It needs more people willing to be light." Jimmy closed his eyes for just a moment, then opened them. "Thank you," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Denzel nodded. "You've already been thanking me," he said, "every night, just by being who you are." And in that moment, the message was no longer about one man's necklace. It was about all of us, and the quiet power of letting people see the good we carry inside. Jimmy looked down again, his fingers brushing over the small silver cross. It caught the light just enough to shimmer, not flashy, not big, but unmistakably real. You could tell it had some age to it, the kind of peace that wasn't bought, but given. He cleared his throat, the quiet still hanging in the air like a blanket no one wanted to lift just yet. "This," he started, then paused, searching for the right words. He held the cross gently between his fingers. "This belonged to my Uncle Sal." The crowd listened. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich. He was a mechanic in Brooklyn, had rough hands, bad knees, and the biggest heart I've ever known. Jimmy's voice cracked just slightly, but he didn't pull back. "He gave this to me after my dad passed," he said. "Told me, you don't have to talk about God to walk with Him. Just be good to people, every day, that's enough." Denzel nodded, silent approval. A moment shared between men who understood the language of legacy. "I was never loud about faith," Jimmy continued. "Never felt like I had the right words, you know. I didn't grow up preaching or quoting scripture, but I watched him." He looked up toward the audience, then back at Denzel. He'd give his last 20 to someone who needed it more. Let strangers borrow his truck, never expected anything back. He didn't wear his faith like a badge. He wore it like a backbone. Jimmy let the cross fall gently back against his chest. "I kept it all these years," he said. "Every taping, every interview, just never really talked about it on air." He exhaled. "Not because I was ashamed, just because it felt personal, like something between me and Him, between me and God." A few in the audience wiped their eyes. "I guess tonight," Jimmy said with a soft smile, "was the first time I realized maybe it wasn't just mine to carry quietly." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. It just stayed there. wrapped in a silence that spoke louder than applause. And in that silence, a late-night host became something more. A son, a nephew, a man quietly honoring the legacy that shaped him. By the time the show ended, the internet had already caught fire. Clips from the segment, raw, unedited, unpolished, were spreading faster than the monologue ever had. Not because of a celebrity feud or a viral prank or a comedy bit that pushed the edge, but because something real had happened. Denzel Washington moves Jimmy Kimmel to tears over his quiet faith. A necklace, a legacy, and a late-night lesson in grace. Not a performance, a confession. Jimmy Kimmel's most vulnerable moment. The headlines weren't sensational. They didn't have to be. The story had already hit people in the chest. Within hours, Jimmy Kimmel and Denzel Washington were trending. But so were other words. Quiet faith. Let them see the good. Uncle Sal. Thousands began to share photos of their own personal symbols. Crosses, lockets, bracelets, worn-down pocket Bibles. Things they'd carried for years but never posted. Things that meant something no algorithm could measure. My dad gave me this before his chemo. My mom's rosary. She said it would protect me more than anything. This was my grandma's. She wore it every Sunday without fail. No arguments, no politics, just stories. For once, the internet didn't divide, it united. A still frame of Jimmy clutching the necklace, eyes wet, became a symbol, not of weakness, but of connection, of what it means to carry something sacred in a world that often forgets what that word means. Even late-night rivals chimed in. Colbert tweeted, "When faith is real, you don't need to say much, just live it." Jimmy did. A pastor in Georgia posted the clip during Sunday service. A teenager in Seoul subtitled it in Korean. An imam in Michigan shared it with the caption, "This is what respect between beliefs looks like." Jimmy didn't post anything that night. No tweet, no recap, no quote tweet of the trending hashtags. He didn't need to, because the message had already left the studio and made its way into the world. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that echoes the longest. It's the quiet ones. The ones that don't demand attention, but live with intention. The ones that don't shout what they believe, but show it in the way they carry themselves, day in, day out. Sometimes it's not the grand gesture or viral headline that changes people. It's a simple silver cross worn under a shirt, half hidden, half forgotten, but never without meaning. That's what made that night different. It wasn't about a celebrity interview. It wasn't about a segment gone emotional. It wasn't even about Denzel or Jimmy, not really. It was about what happens when one person sees another for who they truly are and says, "I see your light. Keep letting it shine." Jimmy never expected the moment to become what it did. He wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't chasing a headline. He was just being himself, honoring a piece of his story he'd kept close for years. But in doing that, something bigger happened. Because sometimes the smallest symbols carry the deepest meaning. A necklace, a ring, a faded photo tucked in a wallet, a bracelet worn down with time, a tattoo that only you understand. You never know who's watching. You never know who needs to see it. You never know how your quiet strength might move someone else. Not everything needs to be broadcast to matter. But when it's real, when it comes from love, from belief, from the people who shaped us, it has a way of reaching places we never imagined. That's what this story became. Not about fame, but about faith. Not about platform, but about presence. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.